Okay, so today we are going to be practicing the techniques of hatching and cross hatching. And the first thing that I want you guys to do is to create two rectangles that are going to look something like this. Keep in mind that we are practicing, so your rectangles do not have to be perfect. You don't have to measure them, or don't worry about them coming off a little bit crooked. That's okay, we're just practicing, so that is not of much importance. All right, so we have our two rectangles, and we are going to begin with the technique called hatching. And hatching is a technique in which you create tonal effects by drawing closely spaced parallel lines. In other words, all of the lines are going to be going in the same direction. So to do that, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and start with my lines. And when we want to do a light tone, we separate the lines. We leave some space between them. So something like this. Now the interesting thing is, when you want to start getting a little bit darker on your tones, then you start bringing your lines closer to each other, like this. Notice as I'm going down on my rectangle, my lines are going to start getting closer and closer to each other. This is going to make my tone look darker. The closer the lines are to each other, the darker your tone will be. So I'm just gonna keep going down, bringing my lines a little bit closer to each other every time until I get to my desired tone, which is black. So as you can see, it's already starting to look a lot darker. I'm gonna start coming closer and closer until I get completely dark. All right, I'm almost done right here. I'm gonna just fix this line a little bit, add a little bit more to blend it. A few more lines until I get the desired gradual tone. All right, so here I'm gonna add a little bit more lines to make a little bit darker. And there you have it. That's the first technique. Again, this technique is called hatching. And in this particular technique, all of the lines are going to be parallel to each other. And the way we create the tones or the values is by separating the lines, by spreading them apart. And the closer they are to each other, the darker it's going to look. The farther away they are from each other, the lighter it's going to look. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next technique, which is cross-hatching. In cross-hatching are lines placed at an angle to one another to create a shading effect. So we are going to start in the same way that we started with hatching. So remember, if we want a lighter tone, we spread the lines apart. But the darker we want our tone, then we're gonna go ahead and start placing the lines closer and closer to each other until we get to our desired darkness. So something like this. So I'm pretty much starting the same way I did with my previous technique, except when I want to go darker, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and start adding lines going in the opposite direction. Okay, notice how I'm not going to make my lines all the way across, at least not in the beginning, so they're going to be shorter. And then as I start going down, I want my darkest value to be right here in this corner. So I'm going to start making these lines a little bit longer, and I'm also going to start bringing them closer together. So longer and closer together. Can you start to see the difference already? It's already starting to get darker and darker, which is what we want. All right. So you can see how I went from light to dark, and I can even go darker than that if I want. All I have to do is do another set of lines going in a different direction. Okay, this time I'm gonna do horizontal lines. And again, my lines are gonna start shorter, getting a little bit longer. and closer to each other as I get closer to my darkest value, which is this corner right there. Okay, just keep adding your lines. And remember that the darker you want, then you have to just simply draw your lines closer to each other. You can also add multiple layers of lines like I'm doing right now. This is my third layer, but I feel like I can still do one tone darker. So I'm gonna go ahead and start about right here. Now I'm doing vertical lines. You can see how I started with the tall one right here. I'm gonna go a little bit lower until I get to that part right here, to the opposite end, simply because I want this to be my darkest value. All right, so there you have it. This is hatching and cross hatching. Which one do you like best? All right, so what I want you to do next is I want you to practice on your own. Let's go ahead and make another rectangle. Again, remember we're practicing, so we don't have to be perfect. As you can see, my rectangles are a little bit off, a little bit crooked, but that's okay because that is not what's important. What's important in this particular assignment is for us to practice using line in our drawings. In this case, we're using hatching and cross hatching. So for the third sample, I'm gonna go ahead and let you choose whichever one you want, as long as you guys practice with your lines.